Things are about to change. When I say that, I'm sure there are some of you who are going, Dave, things have already changed. Have you been paying attention the last few weeks? Things have dramatically changed in the world. I'm pretty sure things aren't about to change. Things are already changing. Things have changed. I'm pretty sure there are a number of you here who are saying, well, what things? What things are going to change? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Are they things about me? Are they things about you? Are things about us? Why are they going to change? How are they going to change? There are some of you who are like, I'm not sure I want to know anything that's going to change. And there may even be a few people here, probably a single-digit percentage of people who are going, yeah, I can't wait. Can't wait for things to change. I need change. Most of us are unsettled by change. We're disoriented and confused by it. We're afraid of it to a large degree. Over the years, I've tried to figure out what it is about change that unsettles us, that disorients us. And I've read everything from scientific journals to medical journals, psychological books and books about psychiatry and psychology. I've read studies. I've read everything from Who Moved My Cheese to doctoral dissertations about the nature of change. In fact, a little while ago, I came across an article in the Harvard Business Review written by a Harvard professor named Rosabeth Moss Kanter. She's published books about change, and there was an article in the September edition 2012 of the Harvard Business Review where she lists 10 reasons why people resist change. And these are reasons that are oriented toward business, so I've kind of modified them to see if you might identify with the reasons why change is so disruptive, so unsettling, why we resist it. Number 10, she says that change actually causes pain and difficulty. That's why we don't like change, because it actually hurts. It physically hurts, and it's difficult. Number 9 is just a little deeper, more psychological reason, because of unforgiveness and resentment. Number 8 is unintended consequences. We don't know what's going to happen when things change. Number 7 is because there's a high probability of failure. It's what she calls Cantor's Law. Cantor's Law says that every time there is change, there is a point where failure is certain, and it's right in the middle. When you have left one thing and haven't arrived at the next, in the middle, failure is always real. Number 6, feelings of inadequacy. Who of us likes to change? Because what will that mean for us? Loss of face. Will this be embarrassing to me? Is it because of some failure? Is that why things have to change? Number 4 is because we are unprepared or ill-equipped. In every case, no matter how many things you list about change, there are a couple of things that never change about change. I've found 2 unchanging truths about change. And the first truth about change is that it is unavoidable. And change is unavoidable and inevitable. You know the one thing that will never change in this world is that things will change. You can be absolutely certain that the only thing that will never change is that things will change. Like it or not, we live in a world that is constantly, every moment that moves forward through time, changing. And the second unchangeable truth about change is that change is essential. I have a saying that says, not all change is growth. Every time there's change, that doesn't mean there's growth, but every time there is growth, there is change. Not all change is growth, but all growth involves change. And I want to suggest today that if we are going to be a people of grace, if we are going to be a place of grace, that change is essential to grace. A month ago, we started talking about the idea of the essentials of grace. What are the essentials of grace? What does grace require? And we started to unpack the essential elements of grace. And the first one is the idea that grace requires love. It's kind of a no-duh. Grace requires love, but it's a particular aspect of love that grace requires, and that's forgiveness. Grace requires, if we are to be a people in a place of grace, we must see the equivalency of love and forgiveness. There is no grace without forgiveness. The second thing we talked about, the second essential of grace, is humility. And humility, I suggested, had 3 levels. It begins with empathy, just being able to feel what others are feeling. It then deepens when we respect others. It begins with empathy, moves to respect, and the ultimate form of humility is when we serve others. It's a form of surrender, when we are willing to put ourselves in the place of others, to wash others' feet, to serve, to be a servant of others is the ultimate expression of humility. And grace requires both a loving forgiveness and a surrendered humility. Last week, if you were here, the brilliant Dr. Alan Hilton gave us a third essential, and that is unity. I don't know about you, and this is just a footnote, but I'm flattered that Yale professor of theology is sitting in our congregation as a member of Riverbend. I'm flattered by that idea, that one of the leading theologians in our country calls Riverbend their home, and from time to time, he can come and share his sort of like catalogs of wisdom with us. You may not be aware of this, but Dr. Hilton travels around the country. This is his job, to meet with large denominations and spiritual organizations to try to help them find unity in their diversity. So it was fascinating last week for me to listen to Dr. Hilton share the essentials of how unity is essential to grace. And that illustration of harmony, and how harmony is an analogy for what unity should be. It's not just collaboration, and it's not just compromise. It is the best of me put out for the best of us. And I like that. But the thing I took away, I don't know what you took away from Dr. Hilton last week, but what I took away from his message last week was that unity requires courage. Unity is not a place for fear. A coward has no place in unity. Unity requires bravery. It requires courage. If we are to be a people of grace, we are to be a people who seek unity, and that means we have to be a courageous people. But today, the last element, the essential element of grace is change. If we are to be a people in a place of grace, we must recognize how essential it is to be willing to be changed and to be agents of change. But what does that mean? I want to look at it at the molecular level. I want to break it down to its essence. What is change really all about? How does it happen? What is the essence of it? And how does grace operate in change? Now, I have to tell you, this is not what I intended. A year and a half ago, I started thinking about what this series would be, this study that begins and ends right before the series that takes us into Easter. Next week, we start thinking and focusing on Easter. And I thought the series, and I was planning this in early 2021. And I thought, you know what would be interesting? You know what Riverbend would find fascinating? Let's talk about the limits of grace. Is there anyone who is beyond God's grace? Is there a bridge too far? Is there such a thing as an unforgivable sin? Is there anyone who is too far gone? In the life of Jesus, did we ever see a moment where he walked up to someone and said, no, You're done. No, you are beyond grace. And as I began to study the life of Jesus, looking for this, I found that the closest it comes is when he was in a theological debate with the most religious people in the world, the most religious people in the nation of Israel, the religious professionals, the Pharisees. In fact, it's in the 12th chapter of Matthew that Jesus has a number of confrontations with these religious leaders. And it's in Matthew chapter 12 that he talks about the unforgivable sin. That's where I wanted to go. I thought, whoa, I'm going to rock their world. I'm going to get everybody in here and we're going to wrestle with what are the limits of grace. Is there anything that is outside of the scope of God's love? Ooh, that was going to be tough stuff. But it changed as we got closer and closer, and I began to do the work in Matthew chapter 12. I realized what was going on there was not information about the limits of grace, but a portrait of the essence of it. What does grace require? And so over the last few weeks, we've been asking the question, what does grace require? And we come to the last section. The section where I believe what's there is this image of what grace requires is change. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 38, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, come to Jesus and they say, give us a sign. If you want us to change, if you want us to believe, if you want us to recognize you, that you are who you say you are, we need a sign. Now, this was an absurd thing for them to say because Jesus had been performing miracles for years all over Israel. He had caused lepers to be healed. The blind saw, the lame walked, the deaf heard. In fact, there was more than one occasion where he raised someone from the dead. He had done plenty of miraculous signs, but they said, just give us one more sign. Give us the one thing that will cause us to change and believe you. Jesus is at the end. He's at his limit. And he says, you wicked and perverse people, you wicked and adulterous generation, how can you ask for another sign? Let me tell you, no other signs will be given to you other than this, the sign of the prophet Jonah. They all know who Jonah was. They knew that Jonah was, the prophet who had been in the belly of a great fish, who led the city of Nineveh to repentance. And Jesus says, just as the prophet Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And then he does a mic drop on him and he says, the men of Nineveh will sit in judgment of you in the final day because they repented when this wild-eyed prophet named Jonah showed up and told them to repent. And you have someone who is greater than Jonah standing right in front of you. And you refuse to change. Has anyone ever said to you, or maybe you have said, you know what? I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. You ever heard that phrase? I hear it all the time. I realize it's an occupational hazard. When you have Reverend tattooed on your forehead, weird stuff happens. I walk into a room and cigarettes and joints and cocktails disappear. They just evaporate into thin air. You can be in the middle of a story and she was, Reverend Annie. And I understand that I probably hear it more than most people, but people tell me all the time. Well, Dave, you see, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And my question is, are you really? Are you truly spiritual? Do you understand the difference between what it means to be spiritual and what it means to be religious? Because there's an important distinction there. You see, this story, we may not realize it, but the story in Matthew chapter 12 is a story about the two different kinds of change. The religious change and the spiritual change. And I want to talk about this at the molecular level. And I apologize to those of you who are trained scientists, who are microbiologists, who have a degree in chemistry or physics. My illustration is a train wreck. It's not really molecular, it's just 3 circles. I'm still working on this, okay? Yeah, I need you to show me some grace here for a moment. I'm still trying to figure this out because this represents sort of the molecular structure of true change, what it looks like internally in us. And the first kind of change, the change that is a religious change, is the change of adaptation. And it's a change that takes place because in here, in the core of who we are, this is me. Change is taking place all the time. You see, from the time that the cells came together to start to form the DNA that would become Dave, I've been changing all the time. I mean, I was an embryo, and then I was a baby inside of my mother, and then I was born, and I was an infant, and immediately I was a son. 2 years later, I was a brother, and then I was a preschooler, and then I was a kindergartner, and then I was a grade schooler. And then I was a brother again. And all of these things become parts of my identity. And as I live my life, as we live our lives, I become a high school graduate, and then a college graduate, and then a husband, and then a father, and then a pastor. And all of these layers start to identify me. And it's not just the progress of time that creates all these layers. It's also my experiences. It's the championship I won when I was a junior in high school. It's the trophies I got when I was in college. It was the accomplishments. It was the jobs that I had and the friends that I've made. And it's also the negative experiences, the failures, and the losses, and the addictions. And all of these layers start to cover over who I am. And we struggle with all of this change because we forget who this person ever was. And so the change that takes place when we adapt, when we cope, is a change from the outside in. It is trying to redefine ourselves in a way that is defined by all of the layers, all of the parts, all of the pieces of our life. But that's not who we really are. One of my favorite authors is a Franciscan monk. His name is Richard Rohr. He's published dozens of books. One of my favorite is a book called Immortal Diamond. And listen carefully to how Rohr processes this kind of struggle. He calls it our false self. He says our false self, which we might also call our small self, or the parts of ourselves, is our launching pad. It is our body image, our job, our education, our clothes, our money, our car, our sexual identity, our success, and so on. These are the trappings of ego that we all use to cope with, to adapt to our circumstances, to get through an ordinary day. They are a nice enough platform to stand on, but they are largely a projection of our true self, of our real self, of our self-image, not of who we really are, but of who we think we are, and our attachment to that. And the truth is that none of these things will last, because all of these are prone to fail. This is spinning plates. If my identity is here on a Sunday morning, I have to work like mad to prop up that identity. It requires all of my effort. And if my identity is found as a parent, if my identity is found as an attorney, if my identity is found in my profession, if my identity is found in my relationships, none of them will last. They will all fail. They can't be who we really are. That can't be our true self. But if we are just adapting, if we are just being religious, we are just adding layers to our lives to try to gloss over all of this stuff so that we can be a good person, it'll never work. But there's another kind of transformation. There's another kind of change, and it is the change of transformation. And this is a change that takes place from the inside out. This is a change that begins with the belief that we are the imago Dei. We are fashioned in the image of God, each of us. That I am exactly who God wanted me to be. That I am in my true self, in my core self, in the way God sees me. I am exactly who I am supposed to be. And all of the layers, all of the stuff, the son and the brother and the cousin and the uncle and the father and the husband and the pastor and the addict and the divorcee and the pastor and the truck driver and the professional person, all of those things don't change that identity. They're just parts of it. And so transformation comes as I surrender to that idea that I am made in God's image. And all of the layers, all of the pieces are there for a purpose. They all have meaning. They are all there to be a reflection of the image of God in me. Now, the interesting thing is, this takes place by grace. This is how grace changes us. Grace transforms us from trying to cope and adapt to the recognition that we are made in God's image and that we have a purpose and we have a destiny and we have a design. And all of this is by grace. Now, in religious circles, we call this salvation. We call this transition, this transformation, what it means to be saved, what it means to be born again, what it means to be transformed. But that's not all that is involved. You see, it doesn't just change how we see ourselves, it changes how we see others. Because if we see others just from this point of view, it's just projection. Because what we see of them is what we see in ourselves. The things I hate in me are the things I hate in you. The things that I wish were in me that are in you, I desire those. And that's not how grace operates. This is a projection of this adaptation of trying to find who we really are. And this is inadequate. It's insufficient. There's another Catholic priest who has written some profound reflections on the nature of this kind of transformation. His name is Thomas Merton. I find it kind of ironic that I'm talking about how to be change-oriented people, and I'm quoting two Catholic priests who are probably more rigid in their religious practice than anybody you will ever meet. But the reality is they understand that transformation comes from the inside out, not from the outside in. This is what Merton says. Listen carefully. He says, in our zeal to become the landlords of our own being, we cling to each achievement as a kind of verification of our self-proclaimed reality. You just think on that for a while. We become the center, and God somehow recedes to the invisible fringe. And this is what I want you to notice. He says, others become real to the extent they become significant others to the designs of our own ego. Projections of our layers, our parts, our pieces, our experiences. And in this process, all of God dies in us. And the sterile nothingness of our desires becomes our God. You see, the way grace operates is it's not just a grace that we know, it's a grace that we show. So that I see the imago Dei in you. That what I see in you is not just your accomplishments or your failures or your labels or your superficial identities. What I see in you is the same thing I see in me. And this is salvation too. This is how we are saved. This is how we are born again. Not just when we know grace, but when we show grace. To be a people in a place of grace. We are people in a place not just of adaptation, but we are a place of transformation. We're not seeking to change from the outside in. We are seeking to change from the inside out. See, I don't have to change you. The transformation that needs to take place is in me. I apologize for this. For those of you who are scientifically oriented, this doesn't look like any real molecule. I get it. You know, I had thought, is there some way I can talk about covalent particles and I can create an O3 molecule, and it didn't work. So forgive me. Show me some grace on the model. I'm just trying to illustrate this idea that there are two different types of change. That there is simple adaptation and there is transformation. And that's what it means to be spiritual and not religious. What it means to be spiritual is to seek spiritual transformation, not just religious adaptation. I know when people say that to me, when they come to me and they say, Dave, I'm spiritual but not religious. I know what you mean when you say that. It means that's why I'm not in church. I get it. I understand it. But you're touching on something that's true. You're touching on something that's timeless and unchanging, that there is a difference. There's a significant difference in how change operates. It operates outside of grace or it operates because of grace. And this is what was going on when Jesus encountered the religious leaders. He encountered their desire to adapt. And that's why he says to them in verse 41 of Matthew chapter 12, he says, there's going to be a day when the men of Nineveh, these pagan Ninevites who repented and sought out the creator of the universe, the God you know as Yahweh. And they sought out that God because of this lunatic named Jonah. I mean, I like to imagine that Jonah was just not a pleasant person. That Jonah was really difficult. And that was before he spent 3 days in the belly of the fish. He came out of the fish and he was permanently fumigated. I mean, I don't know how this works. I don't know what would have happened to him physically. Theologically, we don't know if that meant that he died or that he was just encased in the intestines of a fish in a coma or something. But when he got vomited out onto the shore, I promise you he wasn't the same. He didn't look the same. He didn't smell the same. And he walked 800 miles to get to Nineveh, and he showed up in Nineveh, and he didn't have any audio visuals. He didn't have an opening act. He just had him walking the streets of Nineveh. He probably didn't even speak the language. And yet the people of Nineveh, from the king to the person who worked in the cattle stalls, repented and said, change me from the inside out. They repented and said, I need to be transformed. And Jesus looks at the religious people of his day and he says, you have something even greater than Jonah standing right in front of you. It was the verse before that he clued him in on it. He said, just as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man, me, will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And what you have standing before you is the power of life over death. What you have standing before you is the validation of the resurrection. What you have standing in your presence is true transformation. I didn't intend for this message to go here. I didn't intend for this series to go here. I really didn't. I thought, we're gonna do some theological wrestling, and I wind up doing cockamamie science projects. But it's not good science, but it's good theology. And it's a good example of how God kind of changes things. If we make ourselves available, God transforms us, and that's what happened. I went from considering, let's wrestle with the limitations of grace, to an exploration of what is the essence of it. And the essence of it is pretty simple. It's love, it's humility, it's unity, and it's change. What does grace require? It requires these 4 things. Because we live in a world that will change. We live in a world that is absolutely inevitable. It is unavoidable. The world will change. And it is essential. It is essential. The unchanging truth of the world that we live in is that it is unavoidable and it is essential. There is no grace without change. We cannot be a people of grace and a place of grace if we are not willing to be transformed. Dr. Rosabeth Moss Cantor listed 10 reasons why it's difficult or why people resist change in corporate environments, but it's the last 3 that I think resonates with most of us. So number 3 was we resist change because it confuses us, it disorients us. Who of us has not been confused over the last couple of weeks? Who of us has not been disoriented? We look at the world we live in and we're like, how is this happening? I thought we were smarter than this. I thought that this couldn't happen anymore in the world that we lived in. Maybe we're just naive, but if nothing else, we're confused and we're disoriented. And that's what change can do. That's why we resist it. Second reason, she says, number 2 reason is fear of an uncertain future. You feel that? I feel it. I watched my stocks over the last couple of weeks. I have a fear of an uncertain future. Money I've been saving up since we were teenagers is falling out through the bottom. And this may not be the end of it. But it's number 1. It's the number 1 thing she identifies as why we resist change is loss of control. It's a sense of impotence. It's a sense that I can't do anything about it. I can't go to Europe and stop this thing. I can't overturn the way things are happening in our culture. I feel a loss of control, and change has a tendency to push us to a place where we feel that, and that's a good thing because we're just trying to adapt rather than be transformed. See, I think the most hopeful thing that we can hear is that things are about to change. And not just things, but I am about to change. Lord, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart are pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your word spoken by your servant to comfort us and to challenge us, not just to be transformed, but to be agents of transformation, to be people in a place of grace. And in our willingness to allow you to transform us, may you make us agents of that transformation in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our city, in our nation, and around our world. May the change begin in us. For we ask that in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen.